And it is thought, their permit was denied, but there are no permanent protections in place. And so, you can't let your guard down. This is the time when we need to press forward and get those permanent protections in place. Otherwise, we're going to have to do this fight all over again. If there's anything good that came out of this round of the Pebble fight, was they did make some excellent maps. I did love, I downloaded all their maps and I use them for all my talks and things like that. So this is the area we're talking about here tonight. And it shows so much of the area that I love and hold dear. Over on the left side of the map, you've got Bristol Bay. And then over on the right side of the map, or kind of right down the middle of the map, you've got Lake Clark National Park, you've got McNeil River State Game Sanctuary and Refuge, you've got Katmai National Park and Preserve. And then you see the Kenai Peninsula over there on the right side, just kind of talking about all the places where we're looking. So first off, you might not even know it, but the bears of the Alaska Peninsula, whether you've been there or not. They are the stars of Fat Bear Week, Katmai Park's annual competition to determine who can be the fattest bear out there. There's the explore.org webcam that, there are people tuned in all around the world to watch our Alaskan bears. And again, this is the Bristol Bay salmon. They're the stars of viral videos. This is a McNeil River bear that made the rounds. Brad Joseph said the grizzly bear that ate his GoPro. They've been viewed millions and millions of times. The value of these bears to our state economy is immense. People come here, they see these things, then they want to come to Alaska as tourists and spend their money. So they're the star of Disney movies. Every single bear documentary that you've ever seen was likely filmed on the Alaska Peninsula. And they are an economic driver. They're an important part of our diversified tourist economy. Now, over the course of the summer, the bears are really trying to get all their eating in for the entire year. And this bear, Simba, is over on the Cook Inlet side, and we're going to revisit her trek later as she goes over to Bristol Bay. And, one of the themes I wanted to hit on tonight is just how much these bears love these salmon. Early season, their nutritional options are limited. You'll see them gather in sedge meadows along the coast. And while I have seen bears grazing contentedly, I have seen bears grazing begrudgingly, I have never seen a bear that I thought just loved eating that sedge. They are waiting for that salmon. And as soon as the salmon show up, here's a bear this is over on the Cook Inlet side, that's fishing right in the ocean. They can't even wait for these fish to get up in the river, and it was following the tides and fishing right as those fish are starting to come into the creek. And this bear was here and ready. And I don't know if anybody has had this experience, but it is one of the more magical things you can experience. Salmon run is a powerful experience to behold, just in and of itself. But if you've ever been there when the first salmon started to go up a creek and the bears were there, if they're not showing some love, I don't know what it is. But it's just the power and intensity of that moment. And the bears have been waiting 8 months just for that exact moment when they can start catching these fish again. Now, all these bears are individual. They have different routes. They have different ways of dealing with a sometimes harsh environment. They have different fishing styles. That bear before was fishing right in the ocean in a very frantic style. A lot of people see the big bears and think they're going to be action-packed, but you don't get to be a big old bear by flailing around in the river chasing fish. The bigger bears are, the fishing styles tend to be marked with efficiency. And so this guy in particular, he stood there like a statue and just waited for a fish, and then he would just cannonball right on top of it. It was a highly efficient system he had worked out, and I think the results speak for themselves. This is a famous McNeil River bear. This is Braveheart. This is a learned fishing technique that he learned from a bear called Jordan. They made the switch probably 7 or 8 years ago. But what he's done is he's a big enough bear now that he can plop down right in the middle of the river and pretend that he's a rock. So he's created an eddy in the middle of this fast water. And the fish will swim too rich. This actually might be one of the more efficient fishing styles I've ever witnessed. This is another just amazing fishing style. So this bear, this was back in 2008. This bear would perch on these rocks and go do a flying leap, and 8 out of 10 times she'd come up with a fish. She was a masterful fishing bear. Now the bears and the fish don't always see eye to eye in this situation, but these Bristol Bay sockeye and the bears do produce some very iconic images, particularly at Brooks Falls when you think of the kind of the shot that started it all, the Tom Mangelson's shot, The Catch, which when people come to Alaska is high, high, high on their bucket list. And so I always try to put it in terms like how many people have come to Alaska and spent money in restaurants and hired bear viewing guides and hired pilots and stayed in hotels, and just because of those iconic images. That one in particular kind of started the trend, started the craze. And then when they catch them, that's where you really see the joy. This bear, it almost came across as a butterfly sitting on its nose, but this bear left nothing left over at the end. This was this year's Fat Bear Champion. This was Bear 747 in Brooks Falls. This was 2 Octobers ago. And he's just powering them down as fast as he can. Now, every part of the salmon gets enjoyed. After a bear finishes the fish, a lot of times you'll see them licking up the eggs off the rocks, the delicacy, those little nuggets. They'll go and dig those out of every rock and crevice just to get that extra little bit of that salmon. I like this one because it looks like Valentine's Day. Now, these bears at McNeil River, this is the largest congregation of brown bears anywhere on Earth. And most bears I've seen is at the falls is in about a quarter-mile stretch of river is in the upper 70s. And it just gets jam-packed. It's a great place to learn about bear behavior. 4 days at McNeil River is like a lifetime anywhere else, and just learning about how bears work and what they do and the different behaviors associated. You get to see all their different personalities. Now, the bears don't have enough fish in this river to support all of them. And so they have to travel far and wide. And a lot of times their travel will take them over to Bristol Bay. So this map you're looking at, centered pretty much right on McNeil River State Game Sanctuary, shows the paths of several bears that were collared in the area, collared over at Cape Douglas. Some of the bears, well, one of the bears I've already showed you tonight does make the trek over to McNeil River. And one of the things we've been looking at lately is just how much overlap there is in bears going across those mountains. Now, the pilots will tell you, who fly through these passes regularly, there's a certain point when that fish run starts up in Bristol Bay, that the bears are just single file going through those passes to get over to the all-you-can-eat buffet on those rivers in Bristol Bay. So here's a perfect example. These two bears, and I'd like to thank Max Block, who's in the audience tonight, for these images. Max had the honor of winning a McNeil permit and going out to Katmai later in the summer. And so we got to go look for familiar faces. These two bears in particular jumped out. Here they are at the top. This is on the left is Big Ears, and then on the right is Not Ears. And then 40 miles away over on the Bristol Bay side of the mountains, here they are fishing right next to each other. So they've made that trek across the mountains just to get to those Bristol Bay sockeye. Here's a McNeil regular. This is Dusty. He's really easy to pick out. He's a big old blonde bear, but he's got that gnarly tooth and you can see him from a mile away. So thanks again, Max, for sharing these. Now, just to show you kind of what that trek would look like, this is an interesting story. I was up in Kaktovik looking for polar bears, and a guy on the trip had said, "Oh, I went bear viewing out in Katmai." I said, "I'd love to see your pictures." And that picture on the left is the first one he showed, and I'll be darned if I didn't recognize that bear as Simba from McNeil River. And so she had made her way across the mountains to take advantage of the balance of Bristol Bay. And so when you're looking at actions that we need to take to preserve this area, not just for the bears, but for all the people that love Bristol Bay salmon as well, you do need to still take action. We need to keep on this. And so we are pushing for permanent protections of Bristol Bay. And what you can do is, after the talk tonight, is you can head on over to Stop Pebble Mine now.com and click the Take Action link, where you'll be able to submit to a petition to lobby for the permanent protections of this area and keep it intact for future generations, not just of humans, but also of bears.
Thanks so much, Drew. I love seeing those photos. It's incredible. I think Jen is going to take it over. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And at the very end, if we have time, we'll do a little Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. So our next presenter is going to be Mandy Migura. And just a short intro about Mandy. So Mandy is a wildlife conservation professional with over 20 years of experience in wildlife conservation and management, with a focus on marine mammals. She holds a BS in wildlife and fisheries sciences from Texas A&M University and an MS in biology from American University in Washington, D.C., and a graduate certificate in environmental regulations and permitting from University of Alaska, Anchorage. Mandy participated in or led research studies about marine mammals, worked at vet clinics caring for animals, coordinated government programs for endangered Cook Inlet beluga whales and stranded marine mammals in Alaska, and most recently started her own conservation-based business, Broad Conservation, LLC. And Mandy serves as the Deputy Director of Alaska Wildlife Alliance, where she oversees their scientific programs. And with that, I will turn the time over to Mandy for her presentation.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to point out before I officially start that I actually love this picture, not because I was lucky enough to get a great photo of Denali or Mount McKinley, but because, I don't know if you guys can see my little highlighter here, but these two black dots, these are actually mosquitoes dive bombing my face. And so there's a joke up here that, you know, the mosquitoes are the unofficial state bird of Alaska. And just with how big I was actually able to catch these in a photo cracks me up. But so it's one of my favorite photos of myself because of the mosquitoes. Oh, anyway, I'm not here to talk about mosquitoes. I was actually asked to talk about beluga whales and how belugas love Bristol Bay. And so this is going to be a very lovey-dovey talk in theme with Valentine's Day coming up. And so just real quick, since Jen already gave a bit of my background, this is my proof that I know beluga whales and I know what I'm talking about. Now, I actually worked for the National Marine Fisheries Service for 11 years, and I was the Cook Inlet beluga whale recovery coordinator. And I will be talking about Bristol Bay belugas, but I have done a little bit of research in Bristol Bay as well for those belugas. So I do have a bit of a background on belugas. So just so you know, I'm qualified to talk about them. But before I get into Bristol Bay, I wanted to start out and say that belugas love Alaska. They actually love Alaska so much that Alaska is the only state in the United States that belugas choose to live. And in Alaska, we actually have 5 different stocks of belugas. And here's a map of those 5 stocks. And this is based on their summer distribution. Now, that doesn't necessarily hold true for Cook Inlet and Bristol Bay belugas because they stay in these regions year round. But the Eastern Bering Sea, the Eastern Chukchi Sea, and the Beaufort Sea stocks of belugas are actually very migratory. And so they do move around the state and into Canada. But this is their summer range. So I will be talking about our Bristol Bay belugas. And something that's really neat is belugas love Bristol Bay so much that they are actually isolated themselves. They do not mix with any of the other belugas in Alaska. And what's really kind of neat about it is they are now genetically unique. And so that means that if we find a beluga somewhere and we don't know where it's from, if we can get a skin sample, then we can give that to geneticists. They can pull out DNA and they actually could determine if those belugas were part of the Bristol Bay stock. So that's kind of cool. Oh, there we go. So Bristol Bay belugas, there's actually almost 2,000 belugas that live year round in Bristol Bay. And given that a lot of people don't know there's any belugas in Bristol Bay, the fact that there's 2,000 almost is pretty impressive. And just for a point of comparison, I used to work a lot for the Cook Inlet beluga whales. And I think a lot of folks are familiar that there's beluga whales in Cook Inlet, but there's only an estimated 279. You compare that to just the next door neighbor of Bristol Bay, there's almost 2,000 beluga whales in Bristol Bay. So that's pretty impressive. And that means right now that ecosystem is pretty robust and healthy, that it can support that many beluga whales. Belugas love to sing, and I'm gonna play this in the background while I talk so you can listen. And if you guys can't hear me over the sound, maybe Anne, I can see you, maybe wave your hands if it's not working. But belugas make so many different types of noises that they're actually called the canaries of the sea. They like to sing and they vocalize and they can whistle and grunt and chirp and buzz. They also can echolocate like a bat. We know bats that can echolocate. Well, beluga whales can too. And one thing, I hope you guys can see my marker here, is if you look on the picture on the left, I'm trying to outline this great big forehead. This is their melon. And they actually can control the shape of this melon, and they can squish it and move it all around. And that helps them make some of these different sounds. And then they also can use their echolocation when it's completely dark or the water is really turbid and murky. And so where their eyesight is not really going to help them out a lot, they can use echolocation, where they can actually essentially shoot sound out through their melon, and it'll hit an object, bounce back, and they'll receive it essentially through their jaw. And then it'll be translated into essentially an image in their head. And so they use that a lot to help them hunt for food. I'm just gonna let this play for a couple more seconds without talking.
Oh, Mandy, we can't, I think it's stuck. Okay.
Oh, could you not hear it?
We can't hear it now. Maybe play just a little bit, one more second.
Okay, tell me. Can I get thumbs up, thumbs down? Thumbs down. Well, shoot. I'll try at the end if we have more time. So I'll move on.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. Belugas love family. I think this is a great, really clear image of a beluga mom and her calf. And a mom can have a calf every 2 to 3 years, and they just have one calf. So one baby every 2 to 3 years. So they reproduce pretty slow. The calves are usually born pretty kind of a dark gray or a dark brown, and they will lighten up until a bright white as they age. So you can see mom is wider than the calf, but I think mom is not necessarily full grown because her head, she looks like she still has maybe a little hints of some gray in her. So a mom can still be a grayish or white gray animal and still be sexually mature, but still have some more growing to do. But if you do see a bright white animal, we feel pretty confident that that's an adult. And then the calves will stay with moms, on average 2 to 4 years. And that means that you could have one mom with 2 calves hanging around her. And so it can be essentially, a family pod and a multi-generational. And they do love family. So it's not unusual to find aunts and uncles and siblings in some of these bigger groups. And this other picture kind of shows that pretty well. Belugas are very social and they love friends. And in this picture, we can kind of see several different age classes. There's a couple of moms with calves, and maybe some of the animals in the middle are some kind of like teenager juveniles. And speaking of juveniles, it's not unheard of in some places where you'll see like a herd of teenage boys going around and terrorizing the neighborhood. So some of the males like to kind of congregate together and hang around. And in some of the other pods, it can be a very female-oriented family group. And then sometimes it's not common, but sometimes we can find a lone beluga or maybe a mom and a calf that have snuck off to a quiet place. But usually we find them in pods and groups where they like to be together and be around each other. So they're very social. They love their friends, love to hang out. Belugas love to eat, and they will eat just about anything. And we call this opportunistic feeders. They love their fish. They love salmon and other fatty fish, eulachon, hooligan, smolt and smelt. They love invertebrates such as octopus and crabs. They've also eat sandworms. And so they are, though, pretty seasonal. The salmon are a preferred food. And so they can be kind of skinny come springtime because it's been a little bit leaner over winter. And so they do lose weight, they do lose blubber. But boy, I tell you, by fall, they have beefed up. They are hunky and bulky. And, we could have fat beluga contests too. And so I'll show you this picture on the right, I really love. And I will say, I really suspect this is an animal in captivity, but it's a really great picture to show you what I'm talking about. And if you can see on its flank here, there's this kind of bendy piece that bulges out. And I've had people ask me if belugas have knees, because I think maybe these are knees. And the answer is no, they have no knees, they have no legs. This is actually a picture of a fat beluga. This beluga is well fed, and this is actually fat coming down, and there's going to be an identical one on its other side. And if you see it from above, it almost looks like it's got pontoons on its side, some additional floats. Some people have referred to them as the chicken wings, but these are just, fat stores, and the shape kind of moves a little bit because the water is moving it around. And then also, if we look up, this kind of looks like a beluga wearing some football pads. They got these great big burly shoulders. This is another kind of area. This is some fat on this whale as well. So this is a nice, healthy, fat beluga that has been eating really well. Something else I really love about this photo is look at the angle of the head. You can see when we kind of follow the back around to the head, this beluga is nodding its head. If you think about a lot of whales really can't move their necks, and that's because their vertebrae are fused. But in beluga whales, just like several dolphin species, think of Flipper, if you're old enough, Flipper could move his head up and down when he was talking. If you're not old enough, never mind, kids. But something special about belugas is not only can they move their heads up and down, nod their heads, they can also turn it left and right, and that's pretty unique. So this is actually going to aid them in their echolocation and hunting food. They can turn and follow their prey, whereas other animals kind of have to turn their whole body. Belugas actually can turn their necks as well. So that's a pretty cool thing about belugas. Now, I mentioned on the earlier slide that belugas in general like to travel. Some belugas in Alaska migrate all the way to Canada and back over the course of the year. Now, we've already learned that belugas in Bristol Bay stay in Bristol Bay year-round, but they do travel seasonally through Bristol Bay, and their seasonal movements are linked to salmon. And so we're typically will find belugas in Nushagak and Kwijak bays and tributaries. So that's where I've got a little belugas on the map in the spring and summertime, because they're going after all those salmon runs. And belugas will even travel upriver. So they're not exclusively marine. They don't have to have salt water. And then they'll spread out and disperse a little bit more in the winter, and they'll be found in the northern and eastern portions of Bristol Bay. And that's pretty typical because belugas are a bit more coastal. So they do like to stay within several miles of the coastline because they're looking for the food. And then, I've said a lot of what they love, but I am a researcher, so the scientist in me did have to do just a little bit of a scientific report. And so this is actually a quote from a global review of monodontid stocks. And so monodontids are the classification that includes beluga whales and narwhals. And so there was this global review by a bunch of scientists in 2019. And they broke out and they looked at all the different beluga whale stocks. And this is actually a quote for what they said were the concerns for the Bristol Bay belugas. So threats or concerns to Bristol Bay belugas are climate warming, loss of sea ice, competition from large fishery for salmon. And my screen is blocked. I think it says development projects such as Gold and Pebble Mine. And I think that's pretty impactful that they have actually called out at this global level that the Pebble Mine is a threat to belugas in Bristol Bay. And so part of that reason is we keep hearing about how Pebble Mine is a threat to salmon, but hopefully you get an understanding that salmon affect the whole ecosystem. Not only do the bears love salmon, but belugas in Bristol Bay love salmon, and their movements are tied to salmon. And so if the salmon runs crash, something should happen to them, that is going to have an impact throughout the ecosystem and likely affect beluga whales as well, as long as other potential, if there's any catastrophic effects along those lines. So, I hope that you understand a little bit more about the things that belugas love, and now's the time to raise our voice and show the belugas in Bristol Bay some love.
Thanks so much, Mandy. Mandy is AWA's resident scientist, so I know asking her to put together a presentation with glitter and hearts was a little bit difficult. But as a beluga expert, we felt we couldn't leave belugas out of the story. So thanks for sharing that. And we have also been putting some links in the chat throughout the presentations with links to the petition where you can request a 404 veto, an EPA veto of Pebble Mine to stop this from ever impacting beluga whales. But as we move forward through the night, really excited to introduce Anne Coray. I'm also happy that the internet got back up, so we're ready to go. Anne will talk about her personal history with Bristol Bay area and share excerpts from her debut novel, a love story that's set in a remote fictional artist community in Southwest Alaska that's inspired by the Pebble Mine project. Anne's debut novel called Lost Mountain, which you should be seeing on the screen, will be published in March 2021. So we're getting a sneak peek. We're very lucky to have this. It's published through West Margin Press. And Anne is the author of 3 poetry collections and the co-editor of the Crosscurrents North, Alaskans on the Environment. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Alaska State Council on the Arts and the Rasmuson Foundation. So we're very excited, Anne, and interested in hearing some excerpts.
Can you hear me there?
Yeah, we can hear you. We just can't quite see your screen yet.
For some reason, it says the host disabled screen sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry, because when you joined, that's my fault. 1 second. Let me, sorry, Anne. This is definitely, okay. Here we go. Let's make you a co-host. Okay, how about now? It looks like it's just loading.
Yeah, everything's a little slow here, so bear with me.
So now we can see it's like the Wolverine is on the right hand side.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna get it here. Just hang tight.
I think there's a lot of patience for all of us navigating this Zoom world, so no problem.
I really have to commend my husband because he went outside. Well, first he was inside beating on the ceiling, and then he went outside and did something to with a 24-foot ladder to improve our internet. Okay, here we go. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Alaska Wildlife Alliance and, and Defenders of Wildlife for including me, and also my friend Sue Goodlick for putting me in touch. And I'd like to send a virtual Valentine hug to all of you who do your part in protecting wild places. So I will give you a little background on my relationship to the Bristol Bay area, and then I'll read a few excerpts from my novel. So my parents came to Alaska in 1952. They were teachers in Pedro Bay on Lake Iliamna and Nundalton on 6 Mile Lake, which joins Lake Clark. This area is at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. In 1956, they acquired land on the north shore of Lake Clark at the upper end of the lake, and they lived there for several years. I was born in a log cabin on our family property, and after my father went down flying, my mother spent an extra year there with the 4 of his children and another woman who had also lost her husband the previous year. My mother put up 100 quarts of salmon to get through the winter. That's quarts, not pints. 2 of my brothers also fished commercially in Bristol Bay in the 1950s. In 1963, we moved to Kenai, so Lake Clark was more of an occasional summer retreat while I was growing up. But once I was out of college, I started spending more time there. In 1997, my husband Steve and I moved out there. We spent 17 years living there year-round. We relied on subsistence food for a lot of our diet, and we still do to some extent. We're always very appreciative of wild game meat, and especially salmon. We continue to subsistence fish for a lot of our diet, and we can fish right off the beach in front of our place in July, which is amazing. And we eat canned salmon all through the winter. Of course, we also have a garden and greenhouse, and we bury spawned out salmon in our garden in the late fall to fertilize the next year's crops. In the early 2000s, we started hearing rumors about a mining prospect to the southwest around Iliamna, about 35 miles from where we are on Lake Clark. And within a few years, it was way more than a rumor, and we started paying a lot of attention. We read a lot, and we learned about open pit mining, which was something we were totally unfamiliar with. And pretty soon the Pebble Mine was looking like a very real threat. Even when Steve and I moved to Homer to spend half the year, we continued to follow the developments of Pebble and to voice our protest. So my background is in poetry, and I've been writing a lot of it while living at the lake. And I'd published 3 full-length collections, but then I wanted to take on a longer project. So I decided to write a novel. And the book became Lost Mountain, which, as Nicole said, is a love story inspired by the Pebble Mine. I wanted to personalize the story of a large-scale development, and I'm hoping that the book will generate new discussions. I'm interested in how 2 people in love can maintain a relationship when their views on political issues are not necessarily aligned. Because this event has a wildlife focus, I'm going to share some excerpts that includes animals and fish. Actually, a brown bear does figure prominently in the novel as the inferred ghost of my character Delia's dead husband. But since Drew did such a good job of covering bears, I thought I'd focus on other passages. I have 2 main characters, Delia Melvin and Alan Lamb. In this scene, Delia is walking alone on the beach. It was cold for early November, the temperature hovering between 0 and 10 degrees. The wind, too, had been almost static, building, if at all, to no more than 5 knots, and rising always from the north. Clouds of steam fog obscured the mountaintops. Wispy tendrils lifted from another line of fog on the lake's surface. Standing on shore, observing the white and pendulous drift, Delia felt smothered, but she knew the skies above were clear. Years ago on a November trip to Anchorage, she'd been astounded at the reverse perspective. When Derek took off from the airstrip, she thought the poor visibility would have her clinging white-knuckled to her handbag for the entire flight. Instead, after the plane spiraled up, she'd looked down at the dome of fog and realized it covered the lake only. Open water and cold air created these conditions. The sky itself was a blue sheet, what pilots call severe clear. She could see for miles. At least there was plenty of beach this time of year. The water was as low as it would get, all precipitation remaining in the mountains now in the form of snow. In June, spring melting would begin and the lake would gradually creep up. It wasn't a stroll along the Mediterranean, to be sure. She had to watch her footing, but the scene had its own appeal. Waves had left an icy glaze on clusters of stones, and the ice caps glistened in the muted light like fantastic aberrant mushrooms. Her body was warm enough in her hooded coat, but her face tingled and her nose dripped. A merganser appeared, riding the lake's ripples, the long feathers at the base of its chestnut head ending abruptly like the profile of a punk haircut. The birds were so resilient. Even this late in the year, with the water temperature not much above freezing, stragglers could be found paddling around the bay. How could they endure the cold, cold water? So I kind of liked that passage because I think it does capture the mood of the landscape that time of year. And the mergansers are really amazing birds. They're one of the most common ducks on Lake Clark, but they stay around well into late fall as long as there's open water. And I should mention that I always thought it was the females only who had the red tufted head, but my friend and fellow writer, Richard Chapone, pointed out to me that the males do also when they're not in breeding plumage. When the males are breeding, their heads turn black with an iridescent green gloss. So I learned something. I kind of like in this picture how the ducks seem to be kissing as the male passes behind the female. I thought that was a nice little Valentine's Day touch. This next excerpt is with Delia and Alan together. Alan has already broached the subject of the mine with her, and it has become something of a sore spot between them. He's at her place and the weather is turning very, very cold. Alan has a dog named Betsy. The next day at Delia's, Alan checked the thermometer almost hourly. The first night, the temperature plummeted 15 degrees. The morning of the second night, they woke to 30 below. He got up at 3 a.m. to stoke the fire and adjust the rug he'd shoved against the bottom of the door to arrest the cold air. Betsy stood stiffly and lay back down, curling into a tighter ball and tucking her nose under her tail. In the morning, when they both got up, the kitchen window was lined with half an inch of frost. Delia looked past it and smiled. Alan followed her gaze. A lone fox, fluffed fur making a sham of its true body size, sat near the garden, black-tipped ears in contrast to its red gold body and white chest. Before long, it pounced in the snow, front feet perfectly aligned like the palms of a diver breaking water. Then it sat, working its jaws. For hours, they watched the fox perform this casual act of hunting voles. Satisfied at last, the fox yawned, curled its tail, and lay on top of its self-made pillow. Alan took Delia's hand. He felt like a teenager caught up with her in this rare and intimate glimpse of the animal world, and he couldn't bear to break the spell. All was perfect if they limited their talk. The intoxication was worth it. This scene is with Alan talking to Allie, who is the daughter of another character named Patricia. Allie is about 7 years old. She and Alan are outside the post office after a big shouting match between Patricia and another character regarding disagreements about the proposed mining project. Alan scanned the yard. There was Allie leaning against an old birch. She'd heard it all. The poor kid must be scared to death. When he reached her, he patted her on the head. You're getting to be a big girl, aren't you? I bet you'll grow up to be tall like your dad. Allie smiled at first, but then she kicked at the snow. Why is Mommy so mad? He knelt on one knee and looked her in the eyes. Your mom is a passionate woman. She's concerned about a great big project to get gold and copper out of the ground. It would make a great big hole, bigger than you can imagine. So a lot of poison could go into the rivers and lakes and kill the fish, and you won't have any more salmon to eat. Your mom's trying to protect you. Like I said, she's a passionate woman. Allie frowned. What's passionate? It means you feel really strong about something. It means you love something enough to get mad and excited about it. Oh, she paused. Why do they want to kill the fish? Well, they don't want to kill the fish. It just happens when they do all the digging. What they really want is the gold and copper because it's worth a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars. Allie stomped her foot. Then I don't like money. He patted her once on the back. Good girl. That's a very smart thing to say. Come on. He led her back to the porch. And one more. This is a scene with Alan alone after he's been working hard clearing land for a solar panel installation. Mike is his buddy and the guy he lives with when he's not with Delia. His stomach grumbled. Killing the saw, he wiped his hands on his jeans, then pulled out his lunch from his fanny pack and sank his teeth into a biscuit. He opened a pint of jarred salmon, using his fingernails to pry out the lid. The top layer was always the best, where the fat accumulated. He ate 5 consecutive bites, pausing only to swallow. All that work now of netting and then processing the fish with Mike paled. It hadn't been that bad. Mike was particular, making sure there was just enough airspace in the jars before the lids went on and keeping a close eye on the gauge. But he had bantered with Alan and made the job pleasant. And here was the final reward, sockeye soaked in its own juice, an oil-rich source of protein that no fish farm could produce. The intense red flesh of the wild sockeyes simply looked healthier. Ah, thank God for fish. No, thank the oceans, the lakes, the streams. His stomach closed a little as the food settled. Soon his cravings subsided to a more casual call for Phil. I want to close by saying that when I went through the MFA program, we were taught that writing should not be message driven, that it was best to avoid weighing in one way or another on issues. But I thought about this long and hard, and I figure if an author is writing about something like genocide or domestic violence, readers wouldn't expect a neutral view, right? So I asked myself if it should be any different with environmental subjects. And I decided we need to start thinking about the environment with the same level of concern that we think about social issues. So when I thought about writing in this way, it was really liberating. It's like, guess what? I don't have to apologize anymore or worry that my bias might be showing through. And one last thing, my friend Sue wants to ask me, how is it that you're such an environmentalist being born and raised in Alaska? And my reply was, I guess it's through reading and thinking about things. So there's an example that words, fiction, nonfiction, poetry play a big role in shaping our views. So happy Valentine's Day, everyone. And here's a kiss for Bristol Bay.
Thank you so much, Anne. Those were great. If you look in the chat, you can see where you can pre-order Anne's book, Lost Mountain, the novel, I should say. We like to support local bookstores as much as possible, but know that some of those might not be available. So the Amazon link is also at the bottom. And it is great to see those readings alongside photos from your experience, Anne. We do have a couple minutes left, about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat for Anne, Mandy, or Drew. And yes, also, it's a bit difficult in these Zoom worlds to give a presentation because you can't see who is, you know, you can tell jokes, but it just goes onto an empty screen. So this is also your chance to send kudos and thanks or any observations in the chat to the speakers, because I know that it's hard to see everyone. And I know, Mandy, while we have a couple of minutes, you said that you were able to get the beluga singing on. So if you wanted to put that up, it can juice people's question asking.
Okay, can you hear it now? Okay, great. I just want to say there's a full clip of this available on the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's website. That's where I pulled this from. So you can go back and listen to it as often as you want. And there's also some clips on NOAA Fisheries website. I'm going to be quiet now so you can listen.
Oh, that's great, Mandy. Thank you. And here I was saying that we needed intro music. You know, while people join, we should just have belugas.
We should have belugas playing next time.
Yeah. I haven't seen any questions roll in, though. I have seen a lot of thank you and praises to all of the speakers. I know, Drew, you answered this question in the chat, but your first trip to McNeil was pretty young, right?
It was actually, so my first bear experience was 1982, but it was actually going out to Brooks Falls. So, which for most people who come up here, that is their introduction to bear viewing. And as you do it once, then you're hooked, and then you start going to more obscure places like McNeil River or Katmai Preserve or up into Clark National Park, Silver Salmon Creek. There are just so many great places on the Alaska Peninsula to go watch bears.
Yeah, and if anyone is so lucky to have you as a bear viewing guide, that would be the real. Aaron asks, what can be done to preserve Bristol Bay? Drew, do you want to take it while you're still off muted?
Yeah, convenient. Well, so we have had some major unprecedented victories in this fight, and it's all coming back to people like us raising our voices to be heard. And so now we need to continue to raise our voices, and the first step is to follow that link, stoppebbleminenow.org, the solution. And we're advocating for permanent protections in Bristol Bay. And it'll probably be, it's going to be a process. There are going to be a lot of different jurisdictions and interested parties and things working towards the same goal, but it'll likely be a two-pronged approach. And the first thing we're advocating for is the EPA to use their veto authority under the 404C under the Clean Water Act 404C. And so that would essentially kill Pebble Mine. Like that would be the end of Pebble Mine. And then once that has been established, we could look at ways in order to provide permanent protections for this area. So frankly, you don't have to go through this again.
Yes. Yeah, and if you want to sign on to that, that link is in the chat, stoppebblemine.now.org. It doesn't take long at all. And then it's really great if you sign it, and then great if you can get friends to sign it, share far and wide. Yeah, we're getting some claps from Katie. Tove says, thank you. Now I want to go to Bristol Bay. I was born in Adak, and their dad was an NPS ranger in Alaska. It's very cool. And Joanne sends lots of kudos to everyone for an inspiring presentation. That's from Joanne and David Coray. So thank you for joining. And I should have also mentioned at the beginning, we were recording this, so it will be available. We'll post it on Facebook and website and share it with all the groups who are co-hosting. I did forget to hit record until right after I introduced Drew, so I'm sorry, Drew, you'll be a little cut off.
It's for the best.
You know, we're trying. But thank you again to all of the speakers for sharing your time. It takes a lot of time to put together these slides, and so we're really fortunate to have volunteers like you. And thanks to everyone who shared an early Valentine's Day celebration with Bristol Bay. At that, I will stop recording. I can't manage that.